So welcome, Dr. Katherine Meese, to the Momentum Leaders webinar. We're so glad to have you here with us, and we're quite honored. So Dr. Meese was one of our speakers at our conference earlier this year, and we're so excited to have her back again and sharing with us about job crafting and the importance of paying attention to you and what you need for your job, so you can actually live out your best, not just your best life, but also how you can live out your best work life with the people that you're around, and how you can actually use your abilities at your work in order to make things go smoother in the world around you, not just personally. So thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to see you all today. We are going to do a deep dive into what you see here is job crafting, but I'm really going to talk about life crafting. Okay. For most of us, we live at work. We spend more time at work than we spend elsewhere. And so when I say job crafting, I really mean life crafting, because so much of the time in our lives is spent at work. And so the way that we would craft at work is also contingent on the other values and priorities that we have in our lives. And there are seasons where we might be prioritizing some things over others. So we'll talk about all of those things. I'm looking forward to it. In lieu of breakout rooms, we're going to use the chat function heavily. And then I also would encourage you either pull up a document on your screen, just a plain document, or get out a piece of paper, because I'm heavily encouraging you to dream, to think, and to doodle. So I'm a big fan of doodling myself. And so would just encourage you to do that as we go through. Also, because the group is relatively small, if you do have a question, just maybe put the hand up on the Zoom, and don't feel like you have to wait till the very end. So if there's something specific that you wanted to ask, feel free to do that as we go along. My only request is that if you have a very specific situation to you, like a long explanation about a specific work situation you're having, maybe let's leave that one for the end and make sure that we have time for questions that maybe would be more broadly applicable. All right, so without that, let's rock and roll.
All right.
All right, so everyone was alive in 2020, I presume. So unless a miracle happened, you were all alive in 2020. And 2020 did some interesting things for us, didn't it? We, as a society, maybe for the first time in a very long time, had a mass, slow-moving mass casualty event that was probably impacted every single person on this call. Whether it impacted and disrupted your social connections, your work-life balance, your childcare opportunities, your relationships, the health and well-being of yourself or loved ones, there's probably not a single person here that was not affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what this situation did for us, which is really interesting, is for most people, forgive me for being morbid, that's why I have a black slide. For most people, it caused us to contemplate our own mortality. So you can't go through an event like that where you're seeing people around you at varying degrees of distance from yourself who maybe life was ended too short, or maybe their health was severely affected, or they had to make some major changes. You can't look at that and not contemplate your own sense of mortality. And so, you know, it would be similar to pre-COVID times, like grandma dies and you think, man, life is short. What am I going to spend my time doing? So essentially, as an entire society, we have an elevated sense of what researchers call mortality salience. And it's the idea that death is near, okay? Like my own mortality is staring at me in the face. And so then what am I going to do with that information? And so typically when people have an elevated sense of mortality salience, they start to rethink, what am I spending time on? What kind of impact and contribution am I making? What is the stuff in my life that just isn't important that I might eliminate or shift away from? And so that elevated mortality salience that we're really experiencing nationwide is causing this drastic shift in rethinking and how we consider work, which many are proposing is sort of what's driving the great resignation or the great reshifting. And so people are saying, oh my gosh, life is short. I'm not going to spend my time doing stupid stuff. You know, I'm not putting up with this toxic boss. I'm not going to be in this work environment that's draining my soul. I'm not going to spend my time doing these mundane tasks that have no meaning or purpose to me. And so this is a great time to pause and for us to consider how might we make some adjustments in the way that we pursue work in life that can get us closer to what we want our highest impact to be and what we want that time in our lives to be spent doing. So broadly speaking, this is a great time to reconsider and reevaluate. Now that we're sort of, I would like to say between surges, but that's not entirely accurate. But maybe that we've adjusted to sort of the initial shock of the COVID-19 being part of our lives forevermore. We have maybe a moment to just thoughtfully consider, what do I want to carry forward? And so that's what we're going to spend some time today talking about. And I'm sorry if I just broke the news to you that you're going to die at some point. You know, hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's true. But that can help us really prioritize what we spend our time and efforts on. All right, let's talk about the brain. Everybody has one here, thank goodness. There are probably various degrees of being fried, depending on how your week is going. But I want to talk just a little bit about some of the things that we're learning about the human brain and how this interfaces with how we think about work. I'm not going to do a deep dive here. If I have any physicians on the call, just give me some grace, okay? I'm not going to point to specific parts. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around the neuroscience, but I do want to summarize for you some really important points and things that we're learning that can help us inform the way that we consider our work. So item number one is that our brain loves things that are easy, stimulating, and give us a quick hit of dopamine. So anytime you get a text message from maybe somebody that you're trying to date, or you get a positive piece of positive feedback at work, or you get a like on your social media, that can release a chemical called dopamine that feels exciting. And so the more that we engage in activities that trigger that dopamine release, the more we become addicted to it, and the less we maintain and develop the capacity for deep focus and meaningful work. So very simply put, our brain is geared towards shallow work with quick wins. Now, in some professions, that is perfect because that's what your whole job is. Like if your job is to advance a social media strategy for a company, that's great news because you need to be doing things that are quick, that are maybe not time intensive, but that are staying on top of current trends and getting likes and getting attention and attraction. If your job is connecting lots of people, you're a connector and sending emails and connecting this person to that person and being really a networker, if that's core to your success at work, then this is actually not bad news. That's fine, because spending all day in email doing sort of that shallower work, which is very important, but doesn't require the deepest focus in your brain, is great. Like that might be your currency to be successful. But for many of us who find ourselves in the knowledge work field, there is some element of our work that requires deep focus. And that deep focus, the less we do it, the harder it is to do it. And the more we engage in shallow activities that release dopamine, whether that's doom scrolling, clickbait, spending a lot of time on social media, etc., the more our brains become wired for that, and it gets harder to do the deep and meaningful work. So as we talk through this today, I want you to sort of put on that deep work versus shallow work lens and think about your own role. And we'll be thinking about some ways that you can train your brain and some ways that you can prioritize deep work, which will have a lasting impact and positive influence on the world. So a lot of what I talk today is rooted in neuroscience. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it for each slide, but I just want you to know that's sort of the foundational guiding base of science that I'm basing this presentation on. So next I want to talk a little bit about the principle of essentialism. I read a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend, but I'm going to summarize it a little bit today. This caused me to drastically rethink my life and work, and it's really been life-changing, and so I'm excited to be able to share it with you. So the basic idea, big picture idea about essentialism is that many of us get pulled in a million different directions. Okay, so put your hand up on the Zoom if you feel pulled in a million different directions. It might be you're on a bunch of projects at work, you always have an email inbox that is just flooded with stuff, you keep getting asked to be a part of this meeting and that meeting, you have kids that need you, you have a spouse or a partner that needs you. and you're, running off to soccer practices, whatever it may be, so many of us feel like we're pulled in a billion different directions. I know I do. And so when we don't take a thoughtful approach to organizing our time and our focus, more importantly, our focus, we end up living the life of the non-essentialist. So the non-essentialist feels like I have to be all things to all people. This person is like the duct tape. Like if you don't know who can fix a problem, you're going to go to your duct tape person and just like peel off a piece and stick it on the problem, right? Because you know that person will come through. The non-essentialist says things like, I have to. Okay, so how many times, I don't know, put it in the chat. Try to think, how many times this week have you heard the phrase, I have to, come out of your mouth? I have to go to this meeting. I have to finish this report. I have to read this thing. I have to check on that thing. The essentialist, on the other hand, is someone who very clearly prioritizes the most important things, and they focus only on that. And they thoughtfully minimize all of those other distracting things that don't move them towards a larger goal. So instead of your energy pointing out in a billion different directions, you're pointing all of your energy towards your highest and best use of time, your big overarching goal, and your number one priority. The interesting thing about this book that was really surprising to me is the idea that the word priority, only very recently have we started using that word as plural, priorities. Like that used to not be a thing. When the word originally entered the English language, it was just priority. You had one. And now, how many times have you thought, I've got competing priorities? I've got 10 competing priorities. That's a relatively new phenomenon because we can't point our energy in 10 directions and make a meaningful impact. So the essentialist says, instead of being all things to all people and saying yes to all the good things, I'm going to do fewer things, but I'm going to do them better. They say, I choose to. Not I have to go to that meeting. I'm choosing to go to that meeting. They consider the trade-offs. So maybe I'm going to say, I choose not to go to that meeting, but the trade-off is I won't have good exposure in front of this leader that might advance my career, but I'm choosing to spend my time in this other way. So the essentialist life is not without trade-offs, but it's just a very thoughtful approach and disciplined approach to editing your life. So what does the non-essentialist do? They react to whatever is most pressing. I got to tell you, when I read this, it was like, ooh, this person has just described my morning strategy, right? I log into my email and there's the barrage of a billion things, some of them with little exclamation points, and I'm just going through the list, like, trying to put out little fires. And the challenge is that once I kick that off and put out that fire, then, at some point it's going to bounce back to me. And so I've got all these conversations going, and I'm just reacting to whatever seems the most urgent. The non-essentialist also says yes without really thinking about it. And then maybe later they have to walk it back, okay? Whereas the essentialist stops to thoughtfully orient their day and how they're going to expend their energy and focus, and says no to everything except the non-essential. So this is a really radical thought for me, like the idea that my default answer would be no. I work with someone right now, a surgeon, who automatically says no to every request they get. I'm like, okay, I'm at a point in my career where I probably can't do that, right? But the essentialist could say, let me think about that. Thank you for asking. Let me think about that. Instead of immediately saying yes, which, especially if you have a people-pleasing tendency, is very hard to do. And then what does the non-essentialist get? They take on too much. They're not doing anything really well. They feel out of control, and they feel overwhelmed and exhausted, which I think could describe many, if not most, if not all of us, especially after the last 2 years. Whereas the essentialist chooses to very carefully focus their work and attention, and they feel in control, and they feel like they're making a meaningful impact to their overall goals in life. So if you would put in the chat, there's no shame here. Okay, well, our learning, put in the chat whether you think that in your current state today, you are probably living more of the life of the non-essentialist or the essentialist. I'm curious to hear. Okay, so let's say I've convinced you that being an essentialist is a good idea. It's somewhat countercultural. How do we do it? So first we need to explore what are our options and what are our values, and what are the things that we really want to make a difference towards. Then we need to eliminate everything that's trivial, which is hard to do because things that are trivial don't always seem or feel trivial. And then we need to create systems that help us to flawlessly execute that. So let's get to the bigger question. I can't decide how to focus my effort and energy during the week, or during the month, or during the year, if I don't even know what I'm trying to accomplish in the world, right? I want to pause here and say that throughout the course of your career, there may be seasons where the questions that I'm about to propose to you are a little bit irrelevant. By that, I mean, there might be a season where you have a mountain of school debt and you need to get some financial flexibility, okay? And that's kind of the goal, is to make sure that you have some financial flexibility to pursue something that you want to later on. There might be a season where you need to be in school to advance your goals, and that's what you're going to do. And you may not like it, you may hate that statistics class, but you've got to buckle down and do it. Or there may be a season where you say, you know what, right now, my job is to be a really present mother or father or parent to my children. And I'm going to put some of these essential questions around my work, or this aim to make a difference in the world more broadly. I'm going to focus inside my house, and I'm going to save that for another season. So I just want to acknowledge that over the course of your career, there will be seasons. But let's say that you are wanting to think around how you really focus your effort and attention and energy towards a lasting and meaningful impact. So we're looking for the job or the profession or the activities that fit into this little bitty triangle here at the nexus of these three questions. What do I feel deeply inspired by? What meets a need in the world? And what am I talented at? Okay, recently, I think I can say this because my daughter's 7 and she will not see this recording, but recently my daughter told me that when she grows up, she wants to be an artist. And my husband and I are both, you know, fairly academic, data-driven people. And so this was like my husband's worst nightmare. He's freaking out. So she wants to be an artist. Okay, yikes. 2, what is she talented at? She's literally not good at art. Like, it's not like, oh, she's got, you know, she brings home her art from school. And I'm like, this is really good for a 7-year-old. Usually if she brings home some artwork and I'm like, wow, that's really good, I turn it around and it's like someone else's name on the art, like they sent the wrong one home. Okay, and what meets a need in the world? So maybe she's deeply inspired by it, but it's not really her talent, right? And so all of us might have things that we feel like, man, I would love to do that because that brings out, that's a passion of mine. But we have to be realistic about, I might not be really so talented at that. Okay, maybe that's not where I'm geared. For me, this decision point was, what do I feel deeply inspired by? I considered going into nursing, and then realized I'm actually like super terrible at chemistry and some of the other, you know, basic sciences, biological sciences. Probably not my talent spot. And then the third thing is, what meets a need in the world? So this has a twofold question. What does the world need in terms of making it a better place, but also what does the world need in terms of what is somebody going to pay you to do? Okay, so you might find something that you're inspired by, you're talented at it, and 0 people are going to pay you to do that. That might be a great opportunity to build a side hustle, to have as a hobby, or to build over time while you have, you know, potentially another job. But when you're thinking about your career, we want to find the nexus of these 3 things. So once we figure out what lies within that triangle, then we're going to choose the activities that move us and advance us in that direction towards that purpose. We're going to discern the unimportance of almost everything else, and we're going to decide which trade-offs that we're open to having. So what if you've looked at those questions in that triangle and you still have no idea? Like, you still have no idea. These are some thought exercises and questions that have helped myself and others think around, okay, what is my thing? What's my big thing that I want to make a contribution towards? So one question that you could ask yourself is, what do I want to go big on? It may be that in this season, you want to go big on being the most awesome, you know, parent that has ever roamed this universe. Like, you want to be PTO president, all the cookies are homemade, like you were there for every event. And that's wonderful. Or you may say, what I really want to go big on is mentoring this group of people, or I really want to go big on advancing my field in this specific direction. Another question that you can ask to help clarify this is, how much would I pay to do this? Okay, this is kind of a weird question. Some of you might be like, I'm not paying, I wouldn't pay to work. That's silly. But medical school is a great example. Okay, you look at a physician, Most med students come out of school with a national average of $125,000 to $250,000 in debt. So that question is pretty clear. You would pay $250,000 to do this profession. So if you had to start over and do specific training to be able to do the job that you want to do, how much would you pay to do it? And that can be a clarifying question as well. A question that I ask myself on a weekly and daily basis is, what is my highest and best use of time today? What is my highest and best use of time to get me towards that aim? Sometimes this can be a really helpful mechanism for evaluating requests that come into your inbox, like be on this committee, be on this meeting, you know, write this paper, meet with this person. You can really ask yourself, okay, is this the highest and best use of my time? It is really easier, in my opinion, to discern between what are the good things that I should say yes to and the bad things that I should say no to. Like that one's pretty easy, I think. The much harder question is, how do I determine among all of these really good things that I'm getting asked to participate in or to do? They're all good things. So how do I decide? And so I think this question can be very helpful. I think I'm seeing some hands up in the for folks, and I don't know if you're wanting to ask a question or if it's just up from the question I asked earlier. But if you're wanting to ask a question, feel free, Katie, to unmute yourself and we'd love to hear from you. Okay, if not, I'm going to keep moving. And then the last one is the lottery experiment. So I live here in Birmingham, Alabama, and every time we drive to Atlanta and we cross the Georgia state line, I make my husband pull over and we buy a lottery ticket, which is a little bit silly. But when you look at the Powerball, you're like, okay, if I could spend $1 and make, you know, $1 billion, I feel that the risk is worth it, right? And I know in my head, I'm a statistician. I know that there's no way I'm going to win this. But every time we do it, it's just like it's a habit. And it causes this really interesting discussion about, okay, what would we actually do? Like if we won $890 million, what would we actually do tomorrow? And what would we do in the next 3 weeks? And how would life change? So usually it involves some Kardashian type activities like private island, and there's a yacht involved, and like everything's gold, and I buy my daughter a pony. But let's say all of that's done, right? You go through that whole piece, and then you still have the question of, how would I spend my time? Like, how would I spend my time if I didn't have to work, if I didn't have to make $1, and I had all the freedom in the world and all the support that money can buy? And it's so interesting when we get to that part of the discussion, there are always features of our current work and job that we would keep. Like I would keep writing, I would keep teaching some. I wouldn't grade though, but I would keep teaching. And so by taking yourself really through that thought experiment, it can kind of help you parse out, what are the parts of my job that are fulfilling to me, that even if I didn't have to, I would still want to do this thing? And what are the parts that like, I would never do that again, okay? And so that can be really illuminating around, maybe I need to make some adjustments and shift a little bit more towards the thing that I would do if I won $1 million or $1 billion, and less away from the things that I would never do again. And I'm only doing them because I feel like I'm supposed to, or I have to. And so if you don't know your answer to those, the nexus of the 3 questions, I encourage you to go through some of these thought exercises. Also, if you want to put in the chat what you would do with $1 billion, you know, feel free. I would love to see it. I've already told you my stuff. All right, so, okay, so let's say we have our answer to those questions now. This is my big thing. This is my contribution to the world. This is what I want to go big on for this season. How can I get there, right? That's the next logical question. How do I get there? So we're going to explore lots of options. Like you don't want to make that decision without really taking a look around, okay? So you might realize that some of the things, your answers to those questions, you can do that within your current job or your current profession. And that's an awesome place to be. So then it's really just a matter of making some tweaks and adjustments so that you're doing more of the features of that job that fulfill you and that are making that contribution, and less of the silly stuff. You might look at those questions and go, this looks nothing like my current job. In fact, I don't see a single thing here that's moving me in that direction. I was talking to a student recently who is training to become a healthcare leader. And I asked that student the lottery question, like, what would you do? And she was like, I would run a shelter for animals. I'm like, okay, that's not at all related to what you're training to do. Like, we might need to have a rethinking about your end goals here. And so, you know, if it's not at all related, then that might mean that it's an opportunity for you to really thoughtfully consider, Do I pivot in a different direction? Do I need more training? Do I need to go back for more education? Do I need a specific skill to do these things? Or do I just need to go try it and start building in a different direction? So for me, this was the pivot from working in oil and gas finance at a big Fortune 5 company to doing a solid U-turn and coming to healthcare, because I just couldn't see a future that was getting me towards that meaning and impact in that industry. So I had to make a pivot. I would say I didn't quite take a side step. I took like a down step, and I haven't regretted it since. And so, but in order to understand and to identify that path, you got to disconnect, you got to escape, get out of your daily crazy, right? Where you feel like I have to. And we're going to optimize your brain for creativity and decision making. This is really important. Did someone have a question? Okay, if so, feel free to jump in. Okay, so first things first, you are the asset, okay? You are the asset that produces the work and the contribution. So we have to take really drastic steps, especially in the stressful environment that COVID has created, to protect your asset, okay? So how can we do that? I want to focus on a few elements of well-being that are really important, not only to help you achieve a marathon pace and to be able to work for the long term instead of burning out, but also these are things that can help optimize your brain for creativity and decision making. So if you're like, I don't know about all this wellness stuff, I've heard it so much during the pandemic, like nobody tell me to meditate and put lavender oil on it. I'm sick of hearing it. I get you, I feel you. But I'm talking about optimizing your brain. This is really important. So it's not me, it's science, and it's not woo-woo stuff. First, I want to kind of expose you to this idea of the seven different types of rest. This was a book that was actually written by a physician here, located in Alabama, who was a busy primary care physician, mother of 2 young children, and walked in the door one day and just collapsed and fell on the floor from exhaustion and like had to take a long break, okay? And what she identified is that sometimes we're getting enough sleep and we're still exhausted. But there are other types of rest that we need to feel restored and replenished. And so if you're sleeping enough and you're still feeling completely depleted, you might be missing a different type of rest. So first, there's physical rest. That's the obvious one. Get some sleep. If you're in the camp where you think, I don't need that much sleep, or like sleep is for wimps, I only have to sleep 5 hours a night like a badge of honor, highly encourage you to stop. Really, your brain needs sleep, and there's lots of science to prove it. So not sleeping is not a badge of honor. Also, a lot of research has shown that when you give yourself really defined time constraints to do your work, rather than working all night or pulling an all-nighter or working on weekends and not sleeping, you actually can get just about as much accomplished in a shorter time frame than you can in a longer time frame. Now, in some professions, like if you switch back and forth between day shift and night shift as a healthcare worker, sleep is challenged. So I just want to acknowledge it's not always so easy. Or if you have young children who like to come down in the middle of the night all the time, like I do, it's not so easily done. Then there's mental rest. And this is just giving your mind a break from having to process and think. I refer to my mind as a hamster wheel, like it's always going, right? And so my brain needs rest. And so sometimes that might be getting out in nature, going for a walk, just something that gives me a sense of not having to figure it out right now. Also, very solid breaks from email and disconnecting from work on a daily basis, and then during vacation or times when I'm out of the office, helps me achieve a better state of mental rest. Then there's social rest, and this is spending time with people who recharge you, where you feel like you don't have to put on a face, you can just be yourself. And this was certainly really difficult during the pandemic. Now, you might be introverted and say, I don't really need social rest. Everybody needs it to some degree, even if you just have your one friend that you see on occasion. We also need creative rest, okay? So humans are born with an innate desire to create and to build. And this can look really different ways for people. So I had my husband take the kids for a weekend to the in-laws' house, and I got to fly to Houston to have a girls' weekend. So I was so excited. My flight was leaving at 6 in the morning, so I had to get up at 4. And so instead of going to sleep like a normal, sane person, I went to Home Depot, bought cans of paint, and painted my living room blue. Why? Until like 3 in the morning, and then I just went straight to the airport because I was craving creative rest. I needed to create something, and that had been missing. So I felt very restored, even though physically I felt exhausted. I find that in times of deep distress, where I go in my mind of like, okay, I'm just going to quit and like be done with everything is, I'm always like, I'm just going to move to a piece of land somewhere and like have a garden and be a farmer and make stuff, right? So what is that telling me? It's telling me that I'm needing these types of rest. Specifically, I'm needing to create or have autonomy over building something. Then there's emotional rest, which is linked to social rest. And this is just being able to be who you are without drama with people. And then there's spiritual rest. This means different things for different people, but broadly speaking, this is connecting to something larger than yourself. And so this could be organized religion. This could be being a member of a church or a synagogue or a mosque, or this could be community service. And then there's sensory rest. And this one I think is really important, particularly for those working in this generation. The number of beeps and buzzes and alarms and emails and notifications that we get all day long is really so overwhelming for our brains, because each one represents a distraction from our attention. And every time we switch attention from one thing to another, it uses up some of our limited focus and we spend it. Like there's a limited supply. We can't do it endlessly. And so it gets spent by the end of the day. And if we don't have sensory rest, where we're getting a break from the screen time, from the beeping and buzzing, from the constant meetings and interactions, then we can become depleted very quickly. And so sensory rest is critically important. Probably the best way that I recommend doing this is in the evening. First of all, during the day, if you have times where you need deep focus, turn off notifications on your phone or smartwatch. And then in the evenings, I encourage you to have a time where the phone goes in a box and you're not looking, you're not doom scrolling, you're not liking, you're not on social media. Your brain needs that time of that stimulus-free time. I'm also going to propose another practice to you in terms of well-being and optimizing your brain for decision-making and creativity. This is a daily practice of gratitude. If you're not already doing this, I highly recommend it. I won't spend a lot of time going through the science, but basically even just writing down 3 things that you're thankful for each day for a week had statistically significant benefits for happiness and reducing depressive symptoms for up to 3 months. That's wild. So I have a little notebook and I just say, I am thankful for, I keep a list, and my goal is to get to 1,000 by the end of the year. It's something that you can do very easily in a variety of formats. And it's a great way to hack your brain for being your best self. So this is a low hanging fruit. Even if you feel busy, too busy for this well-being stuff, I can't disconnect, you can certainly add this. It's not time intensive. Okay, so once we've optimized our brain for decision-making, we've evaluated lots of different opportunities or pathways for which we might pursue that highest and best use of our time and the essential path. Then we have to start editing, right? And say, okay, let me look at what's currently on my plate and what needs to not be on there, okay? There might be some things that you need to add onto your plate, right? If I want to move in this direction, I need to start being engaged in these types of projects. I need visibility with this leader that can help, get me to where I want to go. But a lot of it will probably be eliminating things on your plate. And just sharing from the chat, Eve just shared that there's an app for gratitude called 3 Good Things. So there you go. If you're preferring to do it in a digital format. So basically everything that comes across your plate, I would encourage you to basically in your mind, you're going to internalize this. If it isn't a hell yes, it's a no. Okay. So instead of saying, should I do this? I could probably do it. I could probably fit it in. I think I could make that work. If you're not saying, heck yes, this is getting me towards that goal, then it's a no. Now, again, you have to consider the trade-offs. If your CEO is asking you, that no might not be so easy, and it may not be the no that you want to have. Okay. So consider the trade-off before you say no, but the automatic should be no. If it isn't a heck yes, it's a no. So for example, the way this manifests for me, I get a request, hey, do you want to work on this paper that's kind of related to what you do? If I'm not saying, oh yes, this is advancing the contribution I want to make as a scholar in this field, I'm going to say, I think I might not be the right fit for that one, but thank you so much for considering me. Okay. So there are probably things on your plate right now that if you were to zoom out and evaluate everything that you spend your time and effort on, you would say, this thing is not getting me anywhere towards where I'm wanting to go. And it might be time to remove that from your plate. Now you want to be mindful of keeping your word and the commitments that you've made. So it may be a matter of, okay, I'm going to finish this deliverable that I, committed to, but then I'm going to have to, say I've thoughtfully reevaluated my plate and I won't be able to continue participating, but thank you for including me. All right, so we're going to jump just a little bit into job crafting. I want to make sure we also have time for discussion and questions at the end. Job crafting is really based on, well, it draws on a few different theoretical underpinnings, but it's based on a theory called the jobs, demands, resources theory, which broadly suggests that the ideal state and well-being occurs at the intersection of the demands of the job and having enough resources to meet the demands of the job. So you can either reduce demands or increase resources to get to that balance. It's also important to note that people function best and are most engaged where the demands are high and the resources to meet those demands are also high. So if demands are low, like nobody really expects much of me out of this job, and the resources are low, and I don't even have the stuff I need to do it, you're going to be in a state of apathy. If the demands are low and you have all the resources in the world, like, okay, I've got this lame project that's not stimulating or difficult, but I've got a lot of time to do it, you're going to be bored, right? And we hate being bored, so we find ways to distract ourselves. If the demands are really high and you don't have the resources to meet those demands, you're going to get burned out. So the ideal state is high demands, high resources, okay? An expectation for high quality work and the tools that you need to do it. So job crafting specifically is an effort that's initiated by the follower, okay? Meaning your boss is not starting this effort, you are starting this effort. And it's an effort to modify the demands and resources of your job to achieve your desired outcome, which is ideal engagement. So the idea here is that the individual identifies changes that's needed in their job and they propose those changes, the changes are made, and then they identify new changes or tweaks that might be able to be made. And over time, this improves the fit between the person's skills, passions, and abilities and the features of the job so that you have improved performance. And so we're going to dive a little bit more into what this could look like, practically speaking. All right, so demands. There are two types of demands. There are challenge demands, which are demands that lead to personal gain or growth when you're able to surmount them. And there are hindering demands, which unnecessarily thwart personal growth and goal attainment and hinder your optimal functioning. So let's get an example here. So challenge demand would be, oh my gosh, I've just been asked to lead this huge project for our company. And I'm not quite sure if I can do it because I've never done this before, but if I'm able to accomplish this, it is going to launch my career in this area and I'm going to get great exposure with senior leadership to get me where I want to go. Okay, that would be a challenge demand. So like, yikes, this is hard. It's a demand on my time, but it's going to launch me into a state of growth. Hindering demands, this would be something like, I have this really big deadline on this great project that's making an important contribution and I'm stuck spending, 5 hours doing submitting for reimbursement on this really arduous form that has to be done 30 different ways. Okay, so this might be like administrative requirements that are unnecessarily complicated and duplicative. So on the resource side, we have both structural and social resources. Structural resources are individual attributes or aspects of the job which might help you achieve those work goals or stimulate growth. So these could be things like autonomy. These could be things like having money to go pursue training that you might need, or being able to hire an analyst or an assistant. Those would be structural resources. Social resources are social connections with supervisors and colleagues. So these might be things like mentoring relationships, good bonds with your coworkers, and those can help you get your job done, especially in organizations where that are maybe complex and political. Those social resources become extremely important in being able to be effective. So in order to job craft, we can make changes to those specific demands and resources. So we could, to ideally job craft, we could decide to increase our structural resources. So this might be asking for more autonomy for something, increasing the variety in the types of tasks that you get to do. If something's feeling really mundane and you're in that state of boredom, asking to take on something new, or increasing the administrative support that you have. Increasing social resources might be asking for feedback from supervisors, starting career coaching, finding a team to work with, or bringing other people into your efforts. We can also decrease hindering job demands. These are things like removing barriers to inefficiency. If you see a process that's inefficient for everyone and you want to improve it so that it will give you benefits in perpetuity, or even delegating the task to others. So for example, for me, I spent, probably spent 20 or so hours redoing a course that I teach, but I teach it 4 times a year. And that drastically reduced the number of requests that I get from students saying, I don't understand this, or this part is confusing. And so even though I spent a lot of time doing that, I'm reaping those benefits for every semester to come. And then increasing challenge demands. This might be asking for something new. So maybe you realize I'm kind of bored at work and I feel like I've sort of figured everything out that I've been given to do. I'm going to ask to take on this big challenging project that will benefit the company. So you might take on a new role, or you might start a new initiative. There's something really important to note here on how we do this. And probably the best way I can summarize it is that there's always a tendency to remove the hindering demands, right? To just say, or to just say, I need to get rid of things on my plate. I need to remove some demands, okay? The research on job crafting has shown that sometimes, under certain conditions, reducing hindering demands actually leads to a state of disengagement. We get the opposite of our desired effect. And the reason is sometimes we give up the good hard stuff, right? So let's say for a healthcare worker, you might say, I cannot stand interacting with these patients. I just need a break. I'm going to move into an administrative role. The patient interaction is just totally depleting me and I'm overwhelmed. So I'm going to pivot to administration and I've just got to get out of that. And then you realize that that was also the part of your job that gave you meaning and purpose. And so it's really important when you're identifying specifically the demand reduction piece that you're not giving away the good hard stuff. But you might be able to give away some of the stuff that you don't like and swap with somebody who loves that stuff. So for example, if we're thinking about a physician, one physician might love interacting with patients at the bedside, in person. That's why they went into medicine. It really fills them up. They're an extrovert. They get a lot of energy from it. And you might have another physician who's in the same specialty that totally depletes them, but they would love to do more telemedicine that they're able to do remotely, because it brings a better work-life balance for them. Those people could swap and have more of what they want without any reductions in patient care. So sometimes the most important thing we can do is not to assume that the things that you hate and you're bad at, that everybody hates and they're bad at, okay? You might love a good spreadsheet and really enjoy creating a beautiful report in Excel, and someone on your team may absolutely hate that. So by finding out what are you good at, what do you like, what are other people good at, and what do they like, you might be able to trade or swap without any impact to business operations. And I think that's important when you're pushing this to your leader or manager, to make sure that what you're proposing is not just, I want to stop doing the hard stuff. You're proposing, here's how I think I could pivot this work in a way that will benefit our overall goals, objectives, and vision. So that's an important part of the sell. All right, so somehow my mouse is not working. There we go. So we'll kind of start wrapping up our time here by talking about how do we execute this. So once you're going through this thought exercise, how do you put it into practice? And how do you really improve your productivity, not on just doing stuff, but on doing the right stuff and making the impact that you want to make, right? So how do you improve your progression towards advancing those big goals that we've identified earlier in the presentation? I want to go through a couple of things. First, I want to talk about focus. More recent research is helping us understand that focus is actually a finite resource in your day. Like, it's not something that you can just do all day long. Once you spend it, it's kind of spent. There are some things that you can do to improve your ability to sustain focus and to focus for longer periods during the day. But once you spend it, it's kind of spent for the day, which to me is like, oh no, right? Because I feel like I have things that I need to focus on all day long. There are things that deplete your focus, and this is probably the biggest culprit is constant task switching. Okay, so the best way I could describe task switching is, in terms of examples that probably are happening to all of us in our everyday work, is you've got your email open, you've got maybe a window open for the news, maybe you've got like LinkedIn or some other social media that you're kind of supposed to be on for work over here, and maybe you've got a paper that you're writing or a presentation you're putting together over here. Okay, so you've got 4 different things going on back and forth. and you're working on one, and then you hear like a notification and you switch to the other, and then you like get another notification over here and you're switching. Every time you switch between tasks, there's a residue that's left from your previous task. So it's not like a clean switch. So the greater frequency you do this, the more you're building up and accumulating that residue and depleting your store of focus for the day. So for some of you who work this way, you might be going, oh gosh, but that's how I have to work. I have to be available. I have to be on all the time. I have to respond quickly. I have to be aware of what's going on in the news and all these different things. It is hurting your brain. I'm just going to say it that way. The more we work in that fashion, the more we actually deplete our long-term ability to focus. We're essentially rewarding that quick switch and that quick activity, and we're training our minds away from being able to sustain and tolerate boredom, which is a really important element of being able to do deep focus work. So I would say the smartphone is another great example. Like, you're standing in line, waiting to pay for your coffee, and instead of allowing yourself to be bored, you're constantly stimulating your brain by switching back and forth. I'm checking social media, I'm looking at this thing, I'm sending a text, I'm responding to that text. So doing that, particularly at the beginning of your day, means that you're starting your workday with a very depleted focus, ability to focus. Like, you've already used up some of that capacity. So we just have to be really mindful of that. The way this manifests for me, or the way that I'm trying to address this, I should say, is I'm trying to not check email before I start my workday, and not check the news, and not check social media. So I'm not doing any of that in the morning. When I get to work, I quickly look to see if there are any emails that need urgent attention, meaning like a student is having an emergency, my boss is in a meeting, and they immediately need a statistic that only I can provide, right? And then I shut down my email and I prioritize deep work for the next 3 or 4 hours. Now, it's not always, it doesn't always work out well. Like, sometimes I have meetings scheduled, I'm going to go to that meeting, and that meeting is some attention switching, which makes it harder to get back to the deep work. But I'm trying over time to have consistent hours each day where I'm focusing on deep work. I'm not going to be available. So I turn off notifications on my phone, except for my husband, my mother-in-law, and the kids' daycare. Some jobs, this may not be feasible. Again, it depends on what you're supposed to be doing at work. If you are leading a team and your job is to help empower their work and enable it, then yeah, you need to be more available. But if you're a knowledge worker where your job is to make sort of bigger contributions, then this might be a good method for you. The other thing that we can do, if you think of focus like a flashlight of what you're shining on, the other thing that we can do to train our ability to focus is this approach to meditation. So again, I know that a lot of people have heard about meditation and mindfulness, sort of in this big conversation on well-being that happened as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But really what we're doing is we're training that focus flashlight to just be able to, we're charging up the battery so it can stay on longer, okay? So if you think of your focus as a flashlight, and every time you task switch, you're like waving it around, okay? Eventually, you're gonna get dizzy and the batteries are gonna wear out. And so by doing this exercise, you can actually start to improve your capacity for focus. And so first you're going to choose something like you're going to sit in a chair, and you're going to think about your breath. You're going to start breathing and listening to your breathing, and you're going to focus on the breathing and the sensations in the chair, like the physical sensations. Like, I feel, the seat pressing on the back of my legs. And you're going to focus on those things. Now, there's nothing magical about focusing on your breath. It's just, it gives you something that's always with you that you can focus on. You could choose a spot on the wall. That's fine. And whenever your attention wanders, which happens to everyone, okay, whenever your attention wanders, which it will, or a thought pops in, you're just going to notice that. I'm noticing that I'm now thinking about this problem at work. And then you're going to try to gently redirect to your breathing. And then you just repeat that process. I know it sounds simple, but you could start with a minute a day, and the goal is to work up until about 12 to 15 minutes a day. This is something that you could do in the car, like while you're driving. It's not something where you have to have all this extra time to be able to do it. You could do it in the elevator while you're waiting for it to get there. I also want to propose that there are a couple different methods for building out reserved space for deep work or deep focus in your normal work schedule. The first is the monastic approach. This is coming from a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, highly recommend. The monastic approach is basically where you disconnect and disengage completely for sort of a long extended period of time so that you can do your super focused thing. So you might need to write an article or a press release, and you might say, I'm going to be out of the office and I'm going to I'm going to go to a friend's house who's out of town, and I'm just going to sit there by myself for 2 days and just knock this thing out. And some people are extremely productive that way. Or you could take the more ritualistic approach, which is what I'm trying, which is where you sort of have the same times each day that you're allocating for deep work, ideally earlier in the day before you've spent your focus and attention. And then the journalistic approach is you fit in deep work whenever you have a gap in your schedule. That takes a pretty remarkable ability to quickly transition into deep focus mode. And so that doesn't always work for everybody, but if you can do it, then more power to you. For me, it takes at least 30 minutes or an hour to kind of transition into where I can write and do analysis. Last thing, we might want to just consider like a war on drugs, okay? The drug I'm talking about is dopamine. So all of these things in our society that are wired towards entertaining us, giving us happy feelings quickly, a like on social media, somebody reposting, this person sharing a cat video, I mean, whatever it is, those things all release dopamine in our brains, and we start to become addicted. In fact, a very interesting study conducted several years ago actually had to be stopped because of ethical concerns, but it was having children just take a break from technology and screens. And they had all these other activities that they could do. They could do art, they could do crocheting, they could do, reading and drawing, all these different activities for them. And they were supposed to document each hour how they felt. And the experiment actually had to be pulled because kids were having physical withdrawal symptoms from the technology addiction that they had developed, meaning they were getting nauseous, throwing up, some were having suicidal ideation after just, not even a whole day. So after just 5 to 6 hours. And so your brain literally becomes addicted to those things, which is why you might feel like first thing in the morning, you have this compulsion to get on your phone and just start clicking and scrolling and looking and switching. So we've got to fight that war on drugs. My recommendation is to have a very aggressive approach to digital stewardship, meaning be very vigilant about what tools you allow yourself to access and how you use them. So that might mean getting off social media. It might mean keeping social media in a box where, some other member of your family has your password. And if you really want to check in on somebody, you have to ask for it. And you can do some things to make your ability to access these quick and easy dopamine hits, to make that a little bit more difficult. In terms of network tools, I would encourage you to really thoughtfully consider whether or not you really need to be on that social media app, whether or not you really need to access that news site. Things that help us connect and engage can be good and super important for your job, but sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze, we'll put it that way. And then lastly, one of the things that's been helpful for me is called a shutdown routine. And so this is where I end my workday and I end my access to some of these network tools like LinkedIn or email, etc. And I fully allow my mind to transition to being not at work anymore. And this allows me to replenish, to rest, and to recharge my focus for the next day. And so I have started, I have a home office, and so I have started closing the door. I close the top to my laptop, and then I know this is cheesy, but I say shutting down. So it's just like my mental verbal note to myself that I am shutting down, like it's done. I am no longer available. Now, the people at work who really might need to reach me in case of an emergency have my cell phone, and they know that that is for emergency use, right? So some of you may not be able to fully disconnect, but you could probably mostly disconnect. And so I highly encourage you to develop your own shutdown routine. Okay, so I talked way too long, but that's all I have for today. I wanted to leave a few moments for questions. You're welcome to put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. Also, just looking in the chat, I see some people are requesting copies of the slides. More than happy to share. So I'll send those to Darla to distribute. And Alan Gorman is currently task switching. Yes, we are all guilty.
I have a question, Katherine.
Sure.
So I know there's a few of us on here that clearly, Alan is probably one of them, that are a little bit ADHD. when you're talking about how to focus and the deep work and unplugging and balancing between all of them, is there anything special for those of us that have a hard time truly focusing and truly getting plugged into that, just one thing at a time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So certainly I don't want to diminish, folks who might be dealing with ADHD or ADD, but with that in mind, the constant task switching can actually worsen. It's like cranking it up, like the thing that could worsen your brain's ability to focus. So if there's already a struggle there, you're making it worse, essentially is what I'm saying, by this constant task switching and stimulus. So what I recommend is starting a routine time of digital detoxing where you are committing to being bored. It could be a low stimulus activity that you fill that time in with. It doesn't have to be no stimulus. You just have to stare out the window. But you might start with 5 minutes a day and say, I'm going to do something boring for 5 minutes a day. Maybe you're going to do a puzzle, or you're going to doodle, or you're going to write in your journal. But it's a low stimulus activity. And over time, you want to increase that, where maybe you're starting with 5 minutes a day, then you're going to move to 10 minutes a day, and you're training your brain to be okay with lower stimulus. I will say that when you first start this practice of low stimulus or even of solitude, it can feel like all of the things that you've been distracting yourself from, particularly if there's hardship in your life, if there's trauma, it feels like they all come like whoosh, right here to the forefront, and that can be very overwhelming. And so would also just encourage you, make sure that you're building in time for social connection and for supportive relationships as you start that practice, because there may be things that you have to address in your life that you've been distracting yourself from. And so that can be uncomfortable. But I think my broader advice is get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's where the best life comes from.
Thanks.
What other questions?
There's some great comments here in the chat. One thing that Tara Wilkinson said, that with her team, that after there was a work emergency that you had to call, not text, and that allowed her time to not have to keep looking at the phone and removing text and email noises. Once again, I like that. Goes back to a lot what you were saying of just that interaction of actual having that conversation, and that way you have to be fully engaged if you're carrying on conversation with somebody versus texting or emailing.
Absolutely. I see from Joy that it makes your husband crazy that you don't check your phone every time it pings. Yes, my husband's that way too. He bought me an Apple Watch because he's like, I can never get a hold of you. My ringer is off. I'm not connected to my phone. And so, but we've had to come up with some boundaries of that as well. So there's actually a way that you can whitelist so that certain calls or texts can come through, and others you might want to batch and look at towards the end of the day. Any other questions? I know we're running up on our time here. All right, well, feel free to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm available and at certain hours when I'm committed to do that. And I'm more than happy to share these slides. I look forward to hearing how your journey goes towards essentialism, and I appreciate you joining today.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Meese. And we'll also be able to put the link to everything that you've been doing today, as well as the 2 books that you've mentioned. We'll put that on our website on momentumleaders.org, so you can check it out there.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
All right.
Happy editing.
Bye.